In a previous episode, I talked about branding 101, really, the beginnings of what you need to understand about branding. And I kind of had more information I wanted to share. All of it has come out of my book, Unique, Telling Your Story in the Age of Brands and Social Media. I'm telling you, if you want to take a deep dive, if you want to really look at branding in a serious way for your church or your nonprofit organization, your ministry, or you personally, keep in mind, we have a brand. Oprah has a brand. Tom Cruise has a brand. Billy Graham had a brand. It's what do people think of when they think of you? Never forget that. What do people think of when they think of you or your church or your ministry or your nonprofit? And here's the deal. We're not making this stuff up. Everybody has that thought. Everybody has that perception. So our goal is to try to figure out what that perception is and help it. We can't change their minds. We can't necessarily control. We can't, we can't control what people think of us, obviously, or our church or our ministry. However, branding is really helping shape that. What can we do to change their perception to a much more positive perception? So they'll look at what we do. Keep in mind that for me, this is all about getting them in the door. What you do in the service, what you do with your work may be wonderful. However, if we can't get the interest of a donor to help support what you do, if we can't get a potential church member to walk in the door, we failed. So think of branding in many ways is a net, that emotional connection that makes people want to come, makes them interested in what you do, that will really result in great success. So that's ultimately our goal. And I had some other things, just to review real quickly. If you didn't listen to our first episode on branding, let me just give you a quick recap of some of the things that I talked about that were so important because we live in this cluttered age and we have to figure out how to cut through and actually how to get noticed. Number one, get on the radar. Visibility is just as important as ability. Visibility is just as important as ability. I'm glad you have great worship services. I'm glad the water wells you build in India are awesome. But if nobody knows about it, you failed. So we have to be intentional about getting visibility for what we do and what our message is. The second thing is everything communicates. Everything communicates. We have to remember that in this incredibly cluttered world out there, everything communicates. The third thing is understand that the digital culture is unforgiving. We have to pay attention online. We have to pay attention in social media. We have to pay attention on our website and other people's websites because in an email, text messaging, instant message world, word travels fast. I mentioned earlier about thinking of Google, less about search and more about reputation management because whatever mistakes you've made, whatever thing you've committed, whatever you've done, it'll never go away if it's online. So, in fact, we are called into a lot of ministries or in a lot of churches who have had problems in the past. Maybe they were legitimate problems. Maybe they were just controversies that the local media had created or some disgruntled ex-church member or employee had created. But it comes up in a web search. So we've been called in, our team at Cooke Pictures has been called in to help walk churches through a process to help get better stuff to come up when people search for your church or your ministry. A fourth thing that we talked about is the power of a name. Keep in mind, studies have indicated that when we meet someone for the first time, we decide what we think of that person in the first 4 to 8 seconds. So in that kind of incredibly quick world, your name matters because people will decide whether to donate to you, whether to give, whether to visit, sometimes just on the power of your name. So that's why we've walked many churches and nonprofits and ministry organizations through a name change process. Our branding team here at Cooke Pictures helps churches with a process of helping change their name because sometimes names have just gotten out of date. They've lost meaning. They don't have, they may be the name of your housing development or wherever you might be located geographically, but as your ministry grows to a national scale, nobody knows what that means. So how do we change that? And then, of course, speak the language of design. We talked about that briefly, too. I think design really is far more important than most people think, particularly in the ministry world. Design is incredibly, incredibly important. And to start today's talk, just kind of part 2 on branding, one of the things with design that I think is incredibly important is understanding video, short video. As I talk about this podcast, as we do this today, video has now become the number one marketing tool in America, which means more companies are using video, short videos, and I'm talking 4 to 6 minute videos, than any other way to market their company. They're releasing short videos on their website. They're using short videos on on YouTube. They're using short videos in social media. They're creating YouTube channels that are filled with these kind of short videos. They may be product demonstrations. They may be testimonies. They may be the history of the company. They may be inspiring stories. There's hundreds of different types of stories you could tell. One of the things, by the way, I've noticed is that we've discovered in our work here at Cooke Pictures with our media team is that testimonies are probably the most powerful thing you could possibly do. In other words, stories of people whose lives have been changed because of what you do. We learned with infomercials years ago doing secular infomercials. Remember those horrible TV shows that keep you up late at night or the only thing that's on at 2 a.m? We learned that a host could be talking about a product. Maybe it's a miracle fryer or oven or some kitchen utensil. And he could talk till he's blue in the face. I mean, the features, all the wonderful things it does. He could talk till he's blue in the face. But it's not until he shows the story of Floyd in Cleveland who bought it, got it home, took it to his family reunion, used that to cook the food for the family reunion, became the rock star because it was so awesome. That's when people watching at home think, you know what, if it worked for that guy, maybe it'll work for me. And that's when they order, that's when they buy. So we've translated that into ministry media such that you can preach all you want, and that's a good thing. You can talk all you want about the work that you do, but when you show the story of someone whose life was transformed because of that message, because of that work, that's when people think, wow, if it worked for him, maybe it'll work for me. Maybe I need to buy that message, or maybe I need to donate to that ministry, or maybe I need to be a part of the work they're doing. So just when it comes to short videos, think about that. Here's some of the statistics that I pulled that I think are really interesting when it comes to understanding the power of short videos. More than 85% of internet users watch videos regularly. And what we never expected was the 55 and older audience watches the same number of short videos as the 20-something audience. If you thought only 20-somethings out there are watching short videos, you're wrong. People of all ages are watching them. And in fact, 46% of people say they would like to seek out more information after watching a short video. I mean, what does that say for evangelism? What does that say for ministry when half of the people watching your short video want to find out more? That's an incredibly, incredibly powerful opening door to what you do. And by the way, on average, mobile viewers watch videos 3 times longer than those on PCs and laptops. That's something to say. I mean, the world has gone mobile. So whatever you create, you need to think in terms of it working for this size screen. This is where most people are going to watch it. I worked with one big media ministry in the U.S., and for years they were trying to convince me that television, 16 millimeter in Africa or India or Russia or other places, broadcast TV, films were the only way to go. And I said, no. People are more likely today to watch your film on a subway in Tokyo on their iPhone. That's where the world is today. So it's not to discount television. I'm still a big believer in television and in film and theaters. But the truth is, you also need to be thinking short media, short videos in terms of watching it on your phone. It's incredibly important. So I just say all that to say that as you think about design and telling your story with your church or your ministry, short videos are incredibly powerful. On my blog at philcooke.com, philcooke.com, I have an enormous number of articles on how to produce short videos successfully, how to use them for donor development, how to reach people, how to do a great interview. Those kind of issues are incredibly important when it comes to doing short videos. So I'd encourage you, go to my blog at philcooke.com, go in the search box, just type in video, and you'll find an enormous number of blog posts I've written on how to help you do it better. So here's the thing. You can do them with an iPhone. You don't need an elaborate, expensive video setup or a big crew to do it. That's always nice because quality does matter. But when it gets right down to it, you could just get your iPhone out, plug it in, tell somebody's story, or shoot someone telling their story. It's an incredibly powerful tool. Something else, speaking of that, I would say another issue with this whole branding question is, when it comes to branding, you need to take social media seriously. Now, I know a lot of churches, ministries, nonprofits do a great job with social media, and others at least understand its power and its importance. So I just want to remind you that social media is a vital part. Now, a lot of people get frustrated that it may not be the best fundraising tool, But I'll tell you, social media is a powerful tool for mobilizing people, for motivating people, get them excited about something. That's why you see major Christian leaders out there telling their story on social media. So I think it's very, very important. I mean, here's some statistics that'll get your attention. More than 50% of the world's population is under 30. Think about that. Half the population of the world is under 30. Social media is now the #1 activity on the web. 1 in 5 couples meet online, which I think is pretty powerful. In 2009, the U.S. Department of Education revealed in a study that on average, online students are now performing better than students who are involved in face-to-face instruction. And in other words, we're seeing such an evolution in online education that students are performing better who have been taught online than students who have been taught in the classroom. And that's a huge about face when it comes to education. So the bottom line is, you've probably heard me say this before, that now Facebook is the largest country on the planet. When it comes in terms of population, Facebook is now the largest country in the world. So my question to you is, who's sending missionaries to that country? Who's planting churches into that country? I'll tell you, if you don't listen to anything I've said today, think in terms of how we can create an outreach that goes into countries like Facebook, because those people need to be reached. Don't think about missions just in terms of geographical boundaries. Start thinking about missions also in terms of digital boundaries. How do we reach those kind of countries? The country of Twitter, the country of Instagram, the country of Pinterest, all those kind of countries like Facebook. How do we reach those countries with the gospel? It's incredibly, incredibly important. And by the way, as of, I think, a couple years ago, there are now more mobile phones in the world than people. I mean, who would have ever thought? So you see that this is not going away, and this is the future of ministry. It's the future of evangelism. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of face-to-face evangelism. I like to reach people. I'm a high I on the disc profile. I want to engage with people. And I do think fellowshipping is important. Showing up at church matters. But the truth is, when we have such a powerful tool, is the internet available to us, we're fools not to explore everything we can possibly do to reach people through that way. So, and by the way, let me say this, when it comes to social media, give you my personal priorities. When you post on social media, a lot of people ask me when I speak at conferences and events around the world, people say, well, particularly if they're fairly new to social media or if they're older and they're not comfortable with it, they think, what do I post? Let me give you some tips. And I think this will revolutionize how people follow you and the impact of your message. Number 1, make it personal. I think the single biggest reason people follow you on social media is because they want to know what it's like to be you. They want to know what your job is like. If you're a pastor, if you're a ministry leader, if you're the communications director of a church or a nonprofit organization, share what your life is like behind the scenes. I particularly tell this to pastors of larger churches that, in many cases, a church member can't just call you up and say, I want to go to coffee today, if you're ministering, if your church is really large. But through social media, you can give them an idea of what your life is like behind the scenes. And people are curious about that. So many of us think if we just post our opinion about things, people will respond. Well, maybe sometimes. But the truth is, I think people want a glimpse of what you're struggling with, what you're conquering, what you're victorious over, what you're not victorious over, the relationships that you have. And you don't have to share personal information, but giving people a glimpse of what your life is like. You may be a professional writer, a filmmaker, a musician. Whatever you are, start sharing what you do because people would love to know that kind of stuff. Make it personal. The second thing is encouragement for other people that do what you do. Maybe you're a leader. Encourage other leaders. If you're a musician, encourage other musicians. If you're a writer or a filmmaker, encourage those people that do what you do. I love to find great inspirational quotes. I love sharing stuff from my work, kind of what I'm doing right now in this session, sharing things that I've learned over the years with you. You could be doing that with people that you connect with on social media. So be an encourager. People get beat up a lot out there, so share a lot of encouragement on social media and give them practical tips. I started speaking. This is kind of interesting. I started speaking. The first time I ever spoke publicly was on a panel. And it was a TV panel. It was a ministry media thing. This was a very long time ago, back in the days when there were a handful of national media ministries and churches really weren't doing it very much. But I was on a panel, and everybody else on the panel was a major ministry leader. These were evangelists, these were pastors, and there was Phil, who was a producer. I was the only behind-the-scenes guy on the panel. And I was the last to speak. Everybody got like 10 minutes to speak, and it finally got back down to me. And all these leaders were talking about vague 30,000-foot things. You know, we need to use video to share the gospel. We need to be on television. We need to do this. We need to do that. And kind of, they were just throwing platitudes out there, and they were trying to be inspirational. But when it got to me, I thought, nobody's talked about real practical day-to-day answers. So I started dealing with, okay, you want to be on television? Here's how you do it. How do you find a crew? Where do you get equipment from? How do you light a scene? Just some practical stuff that you need to think about before you launch out into a television ministry. How much does it cost? Those kind of things. Well, it was really interesting that when the panel was over, those guys who were major national media leaders, nobody came up to talk to them. And I had a line of about 40 people that came up to ask questions of me. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks that people don't want platitudes. They don't want just, big vision statements. They want real practical how-to information. So you might think about it in your social media, whatever it is you do for a living, practical sharing, sharing practical everyday tips that'll help people be much more effective. And you see that in people like Seth Godin, really high-level people have gotten there because they're good. Tim Ferriss is another example. A lot of people that have shared practical tips through social media. You ought to think about that. A quick third thing is ask questions. I find that many times the biggest responses I get on social media are when I ask a tough question. When I throw out a hand grenade, ask this really tough question that makes people start talking. So think about it. It's not about being controversial. It's really about being provocative. Throwing out questions that, trust me, if we're trying to minister today in this incredibly secular culture we live in, there's a lot of questions that need to be asked. You're not trying to be a jerk. You're not trying to create controversy just for controversy's sake, but forcing people to think about certain issues. And then the last thing I would say is great quotes from other people. I mentioned it earlier. I love posting quotes of encouragement, quotes, to inspire other people. I'm a big Winston Churchill fan. There's plenty of other guys. C.S. Lewis, a lot of guys that I love to post their great quotes, and I get huge responses from those people. So those four things are just what I would say would be my priorities when it comes to posting on social media. And I'll give you a last little secret. I probably shouldn't say this on a public forum like this, but one of the things that I think is a really good technique if you want to grow your followers, and in growing your followers, again, it's not about ego. It's about getting your message heard by as many people as possible. If you feel like God's given you a message that this generation needs to hear, or if you feel like you've got some calling, you want as many people to hear it as possible. So there's a real legitimate reason to help grow your social media. So one of the techniques I've used is follow people you respect. I don't just follow everybody that follows me, or I just don't follow people at random. I want to follow people that I learn from. I want to follow people that are mentors for me, that I know, that I respect. So when you follow those people, pay attention to what they say. And so every once in a while, some really high-level pastor, high-level media leader, some high-level writer, filmmaker, artist, whatever, they'll say something really profound, and I'll respond. I'll just respond, something very encouraging or supportive, or how much I appreciate it or what it meant to me. And guess what? You'd be amazed at how often they respond back. Now, here's the secret about social media, particularly on places like Twitter. When they respond back, they've just showed your name to the hundreds of thousands, and in some cases, millions of followers that follow them. And very often, those followers will think, you know what? If that guy is responding to him, maybe that guy's smart. Maybe I need to listen to him. And you'd be amazed at the bump you'll have in the number of people suddenly starting to follow you. So think about that in terms of who you follow. Make sure they're people in your niche, in your wheelhouse, the area you want to focus on in ministry or in your professional life, and occasionally respond to them. And when they respond to you, guess what? All their followers suddenly see your name up there. And that's just a really powerful tool for getting other people to see that you're a thinker, that you're asking really interesting questions. So I think that's fascinating. And the last thing I just really want to say today about branding and how to get your name out there. Branding ultimately is about a niche. Now, my friends in the UK say niche. Whatever the way you say niche, that's really the key, I think, to branding. One of the great examples I've often used is that all the women who have won Grammy Awards in history, the woman who's won the most is not Aretha Franklin or Barbra Streisand or Celine Dion or Beyonce. the woman that has the most Grammy Awards, at least of this recording of this session today, the woman that's won by far the most Grammy Awards in history is Alison Krauss, the bluegrass player. Now, she's not nationally known. She's not the most famous person in the world, but you know what? She has this niche, this bluegrass niche that she literally owns. I mean, I don't care what happens to the rest of the Grammy Awards every year. When they announce the Bluegrass Awards, guess who keeps walking away with tons of them? Alison Krauss. And she became famous. Now, here's the deal. Year after year after year of being the best in that narrow category, now she's gotten so much fame out of that, and she's gotten so noticed that she can do anything she wants. So she recorded, you may remember, she recorded an album with Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin. She's recorded classical. I've heard she's working on a classical album. I think Alison can do anything she wants pretty much because she's owned her category for so long. So what's the point? The point of this is when I teach directors in Hollywood, I say you can try to be the best director in Hollywood, but that means you're competing against Quentin Tarantino and Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg and a million other brilliant, brilliant directors. Or you can become the best director in a category, a much smaller field to compete in a far easier way to get noticed. And once you become noticed in that category, then you can step out and start taking other categories and start growing and getting more noticed and more noticed and more noticed. So when it comes to writing, too many writers will write a novel, then they'll write a book on history, then they'll write a book on ministry, then they'll write a memoir, then they'll write some on comedy or family issues. And the customer's looking out, who is this person? I don't know what their expertise is because they're writing, they're doing everything. Filmmakers do the same thing. Preachers do the same thing. I think of John Maxwell. John Maxwell, when he nailed leadership, that category of leadership, he pretty much became the best in the world in that category. He's sold millions and millions of books. He's nationally recognized. Now he's teaching government leaders around the world about leadership, cabinet level people about leadership. He's the name that pops in people's minds when they hear the word leadership, all because he stuck in that wheelhouse. He didn't write books on all kind of subjects. He decided to focus on leadership. So when it comes to your brand, think about that category. Now, one of the great examples I use is my pastor for decades has been Jack Hayford here in Los Angeles at Church on the Way. And I've heard Jack preach a million subjects on a million sermons on a million different subjects over the years. It may be biblical stuff like forgiveness or restoration or salvation or prophecy, maybe family issues, just all kind of things. However, I've learned that if you cut Jack, he will bleed worship. Worship is the driving force in him. I mean, he's written 5 or 6 books on worship. He's written more than 100 worship songs. In fact, during all the years that I went to Church on the Way, he was the worship leader at the church. He not only preached, he actually led worship. So what I've discovered is worship is the lens Jack preaches everything through. He may be preaching on family issues or salvation or prophecy or any other subject, but he always does it through the lens of worship. And guess what? That's what's made Jack an icon. It's what makes people, when people think worship, they think of Jack. They think of that kind of thing. So here's the deal. What is that lens that you need to look at your life through? As a pastor in particular, if you're a pastor listening to this, you may be preaching on a million different subjects. But I often say, if I held a gun to your head and said there was only one thing you could teach on for the rest of your life, what would it be? What's that lens? It doesn't have to be a single subject. You need to think of it more in terms of a lens, the perspective that I look at life through. I'm pretty much the intersection of faith, media, and culture. I look at everything in that way. I look at everything and how our faith uses media to interact culture. And as a result, my books are on that issue. Even though my books may seem like they're on different subjects, the truth is that faith, media, culture lens is the way I view the world. And it all comes out in the books that I write and when I speak, when I talk, whether I'm preaching at a church or whether I'm teaching at a conference, it all comes out from that perspective and that lens. So think about that. The niche, whatever you want to call it, is so incredibly important for branding because that's what separates you from the pack. It's what puts you out there because suddenly you're the best. You start out being the best in the world in a very narrow category. But then as you become more known and more known and more known, you can expand and grow. And then suddenly you start having influence in a lot of areas, in a lot of places for a lot of people. So keep that in mind. Branding, just in closing, I can just say branding is so incredibly important today. It's not about ego. It's not about becoming a celebrity leader or celebrity pastor. It's really about getting your message to stand out. If I tell a lot of people the stakes are so high today. In the culture that we live in, getting your message heard. If you feel like God's called you to something significant out there, if you feel like God's called you to share a message with the world, we have to be far more intentional. Surely we could take the attitude that, if God wants to promote me, he will. That's fine. But the truth is, God gives us a part to play in all this. He gives us something to do. And so I'm going to let God promote me. Hopefully he will. But I also want to do everything I can to position myself so that if that promotion happens or when that promotion comes, I'm going to be ready. People will know my message. People will know who I am and what I'm all about. And most important, I will know my message. I will know who I am, what my purpose is. Again, my book, Unique, Telling Your Story in the Age of Brands and Social Media. It's all in here. And in fact, you can take a much deeper dive through it. I'd encourage you to get the book because it's so incredibly important. It's available on Amazon. You can order it from bookstores, anywhere it's available. And also our team at Cooke Pictures, COOKEPICTURES.com. Cooke Pictures, we're the Cooke with an E. We help churches, ministries, nonprofits walk through that branding process to figure out what is your one big thing. What is that focus that we need to think? How do we get known? How does my message get heard in a much bigger way? So whether you want to walk through a branding process, you want to walk through a name change process, maybe you recognize that our name is a problem and it's holding us back, we can help you do it. Just contact us at the website, cookepictures.com, or check out my blog at philcooke.com, PHILCOOKE.com. And if you sign up for my weekly newsletter, which is free, my top blog post of the week, you can download a free ebook that I've written on creativity. I'd love for you to have it because I believe creativity drives pretty much everything we do, or at least it should. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being a part of this. And, go back to philcooke.com because I wrestle with these issues constantly, regularly on my blog and on, in these sessions where I think it's so important. Your perception out there really does matter, and you want to do everything you can to shape your perception so that more people understand who you are, what your message is about, and how you can impact their life.